All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. It seems like every day we get a new story that blows a hole in the climate narrative. A new study showing the impracticality of switching to 100% renewable energy or an electric vehicle battery plant that requires coal power to function. We are told constantly by the media, politicians, and now even the Pope that we must change our lifestyle in an effort to combat climate change. Yet, most people seemingly don't care. These facts have recently left me wondering, what is it going to take to finally destroy the climate narrative? We're going to be talking about this and more on episode 418 of the In the Tank podcast. All right, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. I'm actually recovering. Did anyone else almost have a heart attack yesterday when that alert system went off on everybody's phones? You know, I'm actually wondering how many people heard that loud buzzer and then drove their car off into an embankment or something like that. So I'm starting to calm down from it, but I am actually very excited that now that I know for sure that the government has access to every single cell phone in America, that makes me feel very, very calm.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be one of those signals that went out and turned everyone into a zombie like that Stephen King book Cell, but didn't happen. I had my phone in the microwave for no reason. Also joining us, Chris Talgo. He is the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Well, Donnie, as you know, I'm coming off of 3 days with no internet, so I've been off the grid for a couple of days, and you know what? I kind of liked it. Very quiet. I read actually like half a book, like really good stuff. I think I could do without the internet.
Right. He's in a much better mood than usual. We'll see if that lasts when we start.
I'm much less stressed. You know, it's just all that like hustle and bustle of the internet. Like I don't need that in my life.
Right. Also joining us, we have Linnea Lueken, research fellow for Heartland's Arthur B. Robinson's Center on Climate and Environmental Policy. Linnea, how are you?
Can't say it in one breath. It just can't be done. I frankly am totally out of the loop on why anyone is alarmed or freaked out by the phone alarm system. I thought we've been getting these kinds of things for years, so I'm actually quite out of the loop on why this one's a big deal, so I really don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I remember one of the first ones like several years ago or something like that, and the conspiracy theories that swirled around it. And I felt like I was hearing the same ones this time around. I'm just like, what? This happened. This has been happening for a while now, guys. Like, stop freaking out.
Well, and whoever it is in my local area that has the like power to send those kinds of alerts out are abusing it big time. Because I'm woken up in the middle of the night by some Amber Alert or some other thing on a at least weekly basis. So I'm like I can't recall what the name of the experiment is now, but where they keep ringing a loud sound until people stop reacting to the loud sound. That's me with that alert.
I had the power over that for just like a week. It'd be fantastic.
Well, now if there are zombies, I'm just going to ignore it because they use it so much.
So before we get going, go ahead.
Real quick, speaking of government wanting your cell phone number, yesterday I had to renew my Illinois license plate, and I had to do it online. And in order to do that, they required my phone number, which I just found to be very strange. Why do they need my phone number for me to renew my my license plate? And by the way, guess how much it costs? $151.
Oh yes, I know. Yeah, it's that's like the one thing. The fees for that, especially here in Illinois, are going up faster than inflation. I think it's the only thing. But so before we get going, we do have a
charge for my credit card, of course.
We have a lot to talk about. Those audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, you can catch us a day earlier, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and Twitter, and you can join the conversation. You can throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. You could also support the show by using that super chat functionality. We have that enabled, so you can guarantee that your comment or question is addressed on the show live if you use that, or you could help out the show by not spending a penny, but spending a couple of seconds hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All those things help break through the big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more others. And as a special note from Jim Lakely, we were talking about the show the other day when we were making lunch in the break room, and we were talking about all of our constant listeners. I see many of them in the chat already. We got Doug, we got Christine, we got Cowboy Roy Rogers, Gary in there. I see female KC Royals fan. I love your guys' support. Bring some of your friends on next time. I really want to develop this little community that we have all the time in the side chat over here. So invite your friends. I know that there's a couple of those that know each other outside of the comment section, but it's always good to have more people in there, develop a little bit of a community. Right, Jim?
100%. Yeah. I mean, if you're a fan of this show, and again, we love our regulars. We love seeing you guys in the chat every week. Help us spread the word. I mean, we don't really have a budget to to grow this audience, and there's really only one real way to grow an audience, and that's organically. So if you enjoy this show and you have like-minded friends who you also think would enjoy the show, especially being there live where we can interact with each other, send them an email, shoot them a text, say, hey, the show's on. You should come in and watch this. It's a lot of fun and very informative, and that's what we aim to do. I mean, we are a think tank, and it's we want to have fun on this show, but you're also going to get a lot of really great information about public policy that you pretty much don't get anywhere else. So please bring some friends along next time.
That is true. Yes, we are going to be getting into a lot of stuff as it pertains to climate change and the proposed solutions to climate change. But before we do, there is a little bit of newsworthy stuff going on. And that is the fact that Republicans are making history, folks. Let's hear that round of applause. Yes, that's right. Republicans are making history. For the first time in United States history, I know, yes, history is being made. The Speaker of the House has been removed. So it's never happened before. Republicans, great job. Fantastic. First time ever. After being in position for about 9 months, Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, was removed from that position. Yep, I know. Resolution to remove McCarthy was initiated by Republican Representative Matt Gaetz and passed with the support of an entire 8 Republicans and all of the Democrats. Chris, what the hell is going on here?
Well, I guess what's going on here is that the hardliners, Matt Gaetz is one of them, the Freedom Caucus members were really upset with how Kevin McCarthy negotiated the debt ceiling deal a couple months ago and his negotiations on the continuing resolution, the budget deal last week. When Kevin McCarthy was, running for speaker, he said he was going to once and for all cut spending, and he refused to do so. And it was just, the same old. And I've been watching this stuff, pretty intensely for 20 something years. And it's mind boggling how many times we've had Republican speakers or presidential candidates or whomever come in and say, we are finally going to, cut spending, and we're going to really make, like hard cuts. We're going to actually look at the entitlement programs and, put them on the path to solvency. And every single time when the rubber meets the road, they just don't do anything. So, I mean, I can see both sides of this, because I know that Mark Levin and a bunch of other, people who I highly respect and who know a lot more about this stuff than I do said this was a very bad idea. But then there's also that side of me that says, no, I think that this is good, because finally we have, a group of Republican congressmen who are saying enough is enough, and we are not going to allow you to come in, make these like hollow promises, and then just, do what is always done, where he, used Democratic votes to push forth a continuing resolution that didn't cut spending at all. So, I mean, I can see both sides of this. I think that in terms of So in terms of like political ramifications, for 2024 and beyond, I think that this is playing into the Democrats' hands to some degree because, the media is drooling over this saying, oh, the Republicans can't govern. They are, like they can't do anything. That's true, but it's really, it's true in a way, but it's because they are finally, a few of them, a very select few, 8 of them, are saying enough is enough. And we want someone to come in here and actually do what needs to be done. So,
Jim, I'm not entirely sure what to expect tossing this story to you. I'm not sure if you're going to applaud it like a number of the people in our chat over here, or if you're going to say this is not good, practically speaking. So what do you have to say about this story?
Well, I mean, I think first off, I don't think most Americans care about
Sure.
all this stuff. I shared in Slack as we were discussing it as an organization in our Slack communications instant message thing the other day, and it's like, wake me up when this actually has any effect on the way government is run. I think McCarthy was dumped for several reasons. I mean, the number one reason is that all the Democrats voted, 8 Republicans and the entire Democratic caucus in the House voted to depose the speaker. The Democrats did it because they wanted to embarrass and distract and divide, make sure the Republicans are divide and conquer kind of stuff. As old as time. But the reason those 8 MAGA Republicans, extreme MAGA Republicans probably, did what they did, I think if they didn't just do it out of spite, one of the reasons they did is that McCarthy did not keep his promises to them. It was a contentious fight to get him to be speaker in the first place. And one of the things he promised to do was to try to rein in spending by doing what actually had not been done. I actually had to look this up the other day. There's something called regular order. You have 12 appropriations bills, and they're all categorized, and you pass those appropriations bills through the Appropriations Committee and all the subcommittees, and then you vote on those each individually on the House. And so that's at least if you do that, there's a chance that you can actually control spending in this country. Congress has not done that for all 12 appropriation bills since 1997. That's 26 years, I believe. So McCarthy, the big thing he said to get the support of everybody, and especially those evil MAGA Republicans, was to say, yeah, we're going to go back to regular order. He made a big deal about this. He talked about it all the time. I didn't find any clips, but I'm sure I could have this morning of him saying we're going back to regular order. We're going to run the House of Representatives the way it's supposed to be run, the way the Constitution says the House is supposed to run. And instead, we got one continuing resolution after another, which is or omnibus spending bills, which was what was the way it was run when I was covering Congress back in the early or the mid 2000s. And it's just this idea you put all the spending into one bill and then everybody has to vote on it. So you can't, oppose. And if you oppose something strongly in a big omnibus spending bill or a continuing resolution, you can't, you have a choice. You can either vote against funding the entire federal government or you cannot. And so it's trickery. It's shady. It's bad. And so, McCarthy said he was going to do that. He was going to run these things through the Appropriations Committee. Didn't happen. So McCarthy actually could have, if he really wanted to make that a priority, he could have worked really hard and rode herd over those appropriations bills to make sure they got done in regular order. He obviously didn't care about that. And then you add into that the next continuing resolution had, I believe, no oversight on our spending in Ukraine, which you can support. You can support the defense of Ukraine and actually want some accountability for where all of the American taxpayers' money and basically half the Pentagon budget is going these days. How about a little accountability? How about a victory plan? How about anything? Is it just going to be an endless supply of munitions and money forever with no strings attached and no accountability, no nothing? So some Republicans were like, hey, let's at least talk about it. You're not treasonous or a Putin puppet just for asking, where is all this money going and how effective is it being? So he refused to do that as well. So off he goes. And again, like I said, the Democrats he wouldn't have been able to do it without the Democrats, or this wouldn't have been able to happen without the Democrats. So it only took 8 Republicans and the entire Democratic caucus to throw out the Republican Speaker of the House. Yeah, that's unprecedented. But bottom line, most people don't care. I would imagine 3% of the United States population could even name who the Speaker of the House was before Kevin McCarthy was deposed, and maybe 10% even knows that there is a Speaker of the House of Representatives. So, what is it?
Yeah.
Really nothing right now, but maybe something will change after this, because if there was one thing that Washington doesn't like, it's these kinds of coups, these kinds of political coups to shake things up. So who knows? Nothing will change if he stayed as Speaker. Maybe something will change now that he's out.
Linnea, do you have anything to add? And if you don't, that's fine, because I don't. To me, the last reality TV show I watched was Jersey Shore, so this doesn't hold a
show,
candle
Donnie.
to that. This doesn't hold a candle to that. So
It's still on, by the way. It's still on. Going strong.
I'll
Sammy's back. Sammy's back.
Let's just say I am in support of rhino hunting. I can't say that I'll shed a tear over McCarthy being ousted. I don't think it's the end of the world if we have a government shutdown. I really couldn't care less. The spending stuff, I don't see it being fixed anytime soon. I read on Twitter when this was going on, Jesse Kelly, who is quite an engaging personality, but he made a good point, which is that Republicans want things to change, or they say that they want things to change, but they don't want to exert any sweat getting it done. They don't want any ugliness in getting it done. They want it to magically change while continuing to try the same things over and over again. And I think that there is no possible way that we're going to be able to have any kind of major reforms in how our government spends money, or in how our representatives have a stunning lack of representation for their constituents. I don't think any of that's going to change without some real ugliness. And so I'm not overly, I'm not going to get out my fainting couch when something like this happens.
Right.
Regardless of what the ulterior motives might be. I've seen a lot of people trying to pin ulterior motives on Matt Gaetz. I really don't care. It's not something that I'm worried about.
Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing to this?
Finish it off.
More than half of the federal budget goes to the big three entitlement programs: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And Republicans and Democrats alike say that they will just not touch that issue. It's the third rail politics. It's been that way for so many years. But unless someone, finally does address that, then we're just, nibbling at the edges here. Mm-hmm. And for people like me and Linnea, and you, Donnie, sorry, Jim, we've been paying the Social Security for decades here, and we're not going to get those benefits, and that is going to have a gigantic effect on people's retirements. And unless and until they really actually tackle these programs, we're not going to really make any progress here.
Oh, well, you know what, Jim? I'm gonna lump you into that group too. I don't think you're gonna get any. So
I've known that since I was in my 20s. So no worries.
It's just like all of this stuff.
It's also interesting that people are taking Social Security at the earliest possible age, because they are becoming less and less confident that it's going to be there. If they live to be 80 something years old or so.
These things just seem to be like this kind of unstoppable freight train of just terribleness that, like, no matter what you do, like, it's so hard to slow it down. The momentum is so great. And that is my attempt at a segue into our main topic, which is the climate change narrative. How do you like that one, Jim? That wasn't too bad. Over the past week or so, I've seen a whole bunch of different stories, different articles that seem to just shred entire aspects of the climate change narrative. So we're going to be talking about a bunch of these different stories. One about the impracticality of completely transforming the electric grid. Another showing green energy receives far more subsidies than fossil fuels. Several stories that highlight the absurdity of transforming all vehicles in the country to electric vehicles. And I just wonder, how can somebody look at all of these stories and still have faith in certain aspects of the climate narrative? So that is what I want to discuss in length on today's show. But I want to be crystal clear about a few things before we get going, to make sure that we aren't accused of making straw man arguments or anything like that. So first thing, for the sake of limiting this conversation to a manageable degree, I want to avoid talking about the threat of climate change altogether. I don't feel like I can adequately add to that conversation about CO2 sensitivities of the atmosphere, or ocean absorption rates, or feedback loops or anything like that. So I'll let the experts and scientists at ICCC worry about those debates, or maybe you guys over at the Climate Change Roundtable, which is at noon on Fridays on this on Heartland Institute channel featuring Linnea, that you guys could have that conversation. I want to stick to the subscribed solutions to the supposed problem. So any objection to that before we get going in this conversation? Linnea, I'm sure that you would have plenty to say if we wanted to talk about that facet of the conversation.
I'll just take the whole show.
Right. So let's just put that aside. I, on this show, always like to focus on what the solutions to these proposed problems are. To me, I find those a lot like more. I feel like I could add to that conversation just as like a layperson, and I also feel like they're so much weaker. So yeah, well, I'm going to go.
So you're saying I'm not allowed to say that carbon dioxide emissions by humans is not a problem? So these solutions aren't even necessary on that front? Are we just going to? Okay, I won't say that because if I said that, that would be bad. So
Donnie,
I'm not going to say that carbon dioxide is not a big deal.
One quick issue with how you frame that, because I reject that premise on its face. So it's like I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just like I said, we could have a 7-hour show and talk about every aspect of climate change, but I want to just focus in on something that we could actually tackle in about 45 minutes. That's my objective. So like I said, let the Climate Change Roundtable people worry about that. Let the ICCC experts worry about that with their 400 slides PowerPoint or anything like that. So what are the prescribed solutions to the problems? And again, I don't want to focus on any single fringe element of the climate alarmist movement. I know that there are some crazies out there that are saying that we need to do all types of nutso things, but I want to talk about like the mainstream narrative about climate change. And I seriously want to avoid straw men at all. So Linnea, Jim, Chris, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong in my assessment of what I'm considering kind of the mainstream narrative. So here's kind of the points that I want to lay out. One, climate change poses an existential threat, right? I think that's pretty much uniformly, talked about from everyone on that side. Time is quickly running out to deal with that threat. In fact, we are constantly approaching or stumbling over tipping points in regard to climate change. And in order to stop climate change, we have to, one, transition to 100% renewable energy as soon as possible. And there are certain dates that are thrown out there, 2035, 2040, maybe even some of them saying 2030. And by this, I mean essentially only wind and solar and battery backup. Most of these people reject hydropower, definitely no nuclear. It's usually just wind and solar. Two, transition to electric vehicles as soon as possible. California and several other states have already banning the sale of internal combustion engines by the year 2035. Energy efficiency changes. The Green New Deal, which is kind of the cornerstone of all of this crap, talked about retrofitting every building in the country to be more green. Number four, behavioral changes, reducing your carbon footprint by traveling less, changing your dietary whatever consumption, even having fewer kids. I know that one's a little bit more on the fringe. You don't have a whole lot of politicians talking about that, except for that crazy CNN town hall from a couple of years ago, that 7-hour affair where people like Bernie Sanders did actually talk about that.
AOC talks about that all the time, by the way.
She did talk about that once. Fifth thing, and this is all not to mention that changing the entire global economic system to incorporate environmental goals when conducting business. Any straw mans in that, or am I standing on solid ground saying that's generally the mainstream argument about the solutions to fighting back against climate change? I see a thumbs up from Linnea.
Yeah, that's the BS narrative from the mainstream media and everybody else. I had to really resist hitting the buzzer after every one of those statements.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that one. But
so if we can do all of these things as society, then we can stave off the worst that climate change has to offer in the next several years. So this is the message to a lesser or greater extent that we are bombarded with relentlessly from all corners, from news media, movies and TV, politicians, activists, actors and actresses, even commercials, and even commercials from oil companies, like, for crying out loud. Like, it's clearly from everywhere. They all parrot this narrative. And most recently, Pope Francis has jumped into the conversation saying, quote, "The world in which we live is collapsing," and that the, quote, "irresponsible lifestyle connected with the Western model is to blame." So, Chris, you wrote about this story. Well, let's talk about the Pope for a little bit. What do you have to say to Mr. Pope? I don't know. I'm sure he's listening to this, so be warned.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I mean, I want to do this respectfully. Obviously, the Pope is a religious figure, and he's, admired by many people. So this is not a personal attack against him whatsoever. However, he does have a pretty bad history of making these climate change claims that are just not backed up by fact and evidence. He did so in 2015 when he wrote a 184-page encyclical about climate change. And, it's kind of funny, the timing, because that happened just before the United Nations met to do their climate change conference in which they negotiated the Paris Accords. So, I kind of wonder if the Pope is being used to some degree by these international organizations in order to drum up support among the 1.2 billion Catholic followers, who, I'm not saying they hang on to his every word. However, I think if he comes out and says something like this, and it's written in an encyclical or an apostolic exhortation, as it was recently, that it holds weight. And I think that people, ordinary Catholics, and those in the Catholic Church probably read this and think, yeah, he's probably right. So there's that aspect of it. The Catholic Church obviously has a pretty poor history of, mingling science and religion, and this goes back hundreds of years. So they have not really been on the right side of science when it comes to things like astronomy or the Inquisition. I mean, on and on and on. And also, and lastly, I don't mean this as a personal attack. However, the Catholic Church has a lot bigger problem right now, and that is the fact that they are still dealing with the fallout from the child pedophile crisis that engulfed the church for almost a century, and it was not only occurring, but it was being the church was covering up for it. And on my way here this morning on the radio, they just had a commercial in Chicago about, if you are abused by the Catholic Church, please call this number, because they're doing another multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Catholic Church here in Chicago, the Chicago Archdiocese. And it just makes me wonder, why is the Catholic Church putting its time, energy, and resources into an issue that it's not an expert on whatsoever, when it has a lot more, on its plate that it should be dealing with?
Well, Chris, you might not know this, but that problem is caused by climate change. So this is a way. I'm pretty sure I could find a study in Nature magazine that shows the correlation between those two things. So, maybe you should look into the 97% consensus before you start spouting off about stuff like that.
Good point.
Jim, Linnea, anything you want to add to this, or we could just kind of jump into some of these more specific things I've been talking about?
Well, I do want to say briefly. So I read Steve Malloy had a thread about it yesterday. It struck me. I was taken aback by the excerpts and everything. So I went, and like I did with Laudato Si, I went back after taking a break from my computer for a second, and I read the entirety of this document.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's fair to categorize the previous document as a climate change document. Out of like 60,000 words, the word climate change comes up like 10 times. It was really more of an ecology document. And so went back, read it, and yeah, the Pope's advisors are not doing a good job on this one. As I was joking with the comment section earlier, or not really joking, but saying it would really behoove the Pope to get some like a 10th man policy with his advisory board on this issue, especially because the results of being heavy-handed or even of pursuing like stopping a climate crisis by lowering our standard of living is going to have serious impacts on people. And I did want to point out this type of document is what's called a prudential document, as in it's not saying that climate change is now a matter of church doctrine. The church cannot make science a doctrinal statement. So something like this is, especially in the scientific data that's presented, is not, as the magisterium would put it, free from deficiency. So the faithful are not bound to that part. What they are bound to are the moral principles. And the only moral principles that are really hammered on in this document are that as human beings, we have a responsibility to the environment in general. And if it turns out, which is the case, that the climate crisis is not a crisis, that it is not a problem, then those moral statements do not apply to the climate crisis.
The only thing I'll add to that, and I think it's a good segue into our further discussion about these issues, is the fact, I just want to read specifically point 72, I suppose, in his latest missive, says, if we consider that emissions per individual in the United States are about 2 times greater than those of individuals living in China and about 7 times greater than the average of the poorest countries, we can state that a broad change in the irresponsible lifestyle connected with the Western model would have a significant long-term impact. I mean, the more I read excerpts from this, and I didn't read the whole thing, kind of, I try not to get angry, but the angrier I got. I mean, so, they don't call Francis the Red Pope for nothing. I mean, he's basically, he is a Marxist. I'm Catholic, and so that doesn't mean I can say whatever I want about the Pope, but he is an ideological socialist Marxist. And so he would have you believe that the problem in the world, what's causing this climate crisis, which doesn't exist, but if what's causing the climate crisis is the irresponsible lifestyle in places like the United States and places like Italy, for that matter, and that freedom and prosperity are destroying the climate of this planet. It is demonstrably untrue. The statements of quote unquote fact he makes throughout this entire document are not facts. They're actually false. But if you have to, he just takes these things as a given. And so the solution, as always, not just from the United Nations, not just from the WEF, but from the Pope himself, is to reverse capitalism or to stop capitalism and to restrict our freedom and to make us all live our lives in a much poorer, miserable way. There are religious leaders who choose to live a very poor and basic subsistence type lifestyle. But that is not the choice for most people in the world. And it is the irony here is that the richer and more free a country is, the better job they do in taking care of the environment. That does not mean reducing CO2 emissions, but the land is cleaner, the water is cleaner, the air is cleaner, the more free and the more wealthy your society becomes. So as usual, the solutions for the so-called problem of climate change is actually going to end up making the climate worse.
Oh, Johnny, just one quick thing. While he's belittling the Western model, let's not forget that the Western model has brought the world all sorts of technological breakthroughs, all sorts of medical and health developments. And if you just look at the longevity of people in the United States versus places that don't have that quote unquote Western model, the United States people live much longer. They have a much higher living standard, like Jim said. And just overall, I find it pretty distasteful for the Pope to say it's the Western model that's the cause of all this stuff, when the Western model, as we all know, has actually brought billions of people out of poverty.
Yeah, well, the Western model also gave us Beanie Babies, so how can it be? So let's jump into the electric grid, right? So one of the main things that any of these kind of climate alarmists talk about is we have to switch 100% renewable energy, and by that I mean wind and solar, and do so as soon as possible. So we've talked endlessly on this podcast about how ridiculous of an idea this is. We've talked about how wind and solar are not sufficient to power a modern industrialized nation like America. We've talked about how wind and solar are not economically feasible, and they're, it's environmentally toxic, from the rare earth materials that's needed to the replacement and disposal issues that come along with this plan, to the sheer amount of land needed to build all these wind turbines and these fields of solar panels, the transmission lines, all of this stuff. And to me, all of those arguments that we've talked about again and again on this podcast, they're enough for me to reject this part of the climate narrative. But we have a couple more stories that we can add to the pile here. So the first one is an August 2023 report from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, which underscores the scope of the problems associated with overhauling the grid in this manner. Reading from I think it's a Hill article that I have in the show notes. It says, very soon, NERC says, America will no longer have most of the coal, gas, or even nuclear power stations that have served it well for decades. Most were located close to end users, required only short transmission lines, and provided affordable electricity almost 24/7. Short-sighted policy decisions are closing them far more rapidly than even unreliable wind and solar can theoretically replace them. New onshore and offshore wind and solar installations will be much farther from consumers, will thus require tens of thousands of miles of new interconnected transmission lines, in addition to numerous transformers, control rooms, and other specialized technologies. The report also discusses how much of this new tech would be needed from China, opening the door to embedded gateways that make the equipment vulnerable to surveillance and hacking, and also these sprawling wind, solar transformers and transmission line systems that will be more susceptible to damage from storms, wind, and hail, and etc. And just like imagine a tornado just like obliterating an entire field of solar panels, just throwing all of that stuff all over the place. So the article I have in the show notes for this report even shows more issues with this plan and other reports that have kind of talked about that this kind of supports. So if you're interested, go check that out. You can read it in length. And I get it. At surface level, it sounds great. Oh, we could just get electricity by catching some of the wind that's blowing through the plains, or, collecting some of the sun rays that are just falling down to the sky. Let's just do that. It sounds great. But the closer you look, the more impractical it is. And if you look really close, it really is an impossible objective. So, Linnea, I'm going to start with you. What do you have to say about this issue in general, and maybe specifically this new report from NERC?
Well, I mean, it's not a whole lot that we haven't heard before. We've seen reports in the past that there is physically not enough materials like copper to supply every single person in the UK with an electric vehicle. So that's fun. I really do want to emphasize, though, that these green. I saw an exchange the other day that kind of blew my mind, and it was some people who had all those like climate change tags and stuff in their usernames on Twitter, talking about how we need to stop drilling for oil and stop mining for coal because it has an impact on the landscape, and that we should instead have wind and solar because mining is so bad for the landscape, and we need to stop coal because of that. And I didn't comment on it because I'd rather not get into flame wars every day, but I was blown away by the lack of background knowledge that these people have when it comes to where these materials come from to build the things that they're talking about. Not to mention the quantity of fossil fuels that go into making those panels and those wind turbines in the first place. But there's another element that almost no one ever talks about, which is the fact that unless we are refining fuel, we are not making the byproducts that we can use to produce many of the plastics and other fossil fuel byproducts. Most of those are actually coming from the byproducts from refining to make gasoline. So if we're not making gasoline, we're not making those other products unless we set an entire industrial facility aside specifically for that, which, as they're making it harder and harder to build new refineries, I strongly doubt that they're ever going to do.
Yeah,
Donnie, just real quick. So, as Linnea was talking about how solar panels and giant wind turbine fields, you take up substantial amounts of land, and it's not nearly as, green as they claim it to be. Michael Moore did a great documentary a couple of years ago about the pulverizing of giant swaths of earth just to get those rare earth elements and minerals, because they are like 0.01% of the soil matter. So they
Right.
just need to go and just do this full scale gigantic pulverizing of thousands of acres just to get enough to make a battery or whatever. So
Yeah.
like Linnea said, their lack of background knowledge is just it's absurd.
Because it's not that rare earths are actually rare in the crust. They're really not. There's a lot of them. It's just that they're spread out. You don't get seams of them like you do for iron and copper and stuff like that. You basically have to be processing other materials in order to get those. A lot of the rare earths that we develop now are byproducts or like leftover slag material from gold mining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one other story that I want to just kind of heap onto this pile is like the issue with the cost, right? Some argue that fossil fuels get tons of subsidies, and this claim is based on extremely twisted facts. And in reality, it's renewable energies that are just awash in subsidies. In fact, there's a recent report by the Biden administration's Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration. They published this report in August that shows that renewable energies get, quote, by far the largest slice of the pie when it comes to government subsidies. So, we've known this, but it's always nice when the other side kind of confirms our points that we've been making. But just on this point of the energy grid, Jim, transitioning to 100% renewable energy, we talk about all of these things, everything that, I brought up at the beginning, everything that Chris and Linnea just said, all of these stories that I just talked about. Like, what is it going to take? If we're not there already, what is it going to take to wake people up from this dream that this is even possible, let alone economically and environmentally feasible?
Yeah, we talk about this on this podcast a lot, and it's talked about almost every single episode of Climate Change Roundtable, which you can watch Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern, noon Central Time on the Heartland Institute's main channel on YouTube and also on Rumble. But yeah, we're always, and I know Linnea feels the same way. It's like you see story after story about how so-called green energy is a fraud that, I would have thought years ago now, this is in the innocent times of the Obama administration, when we were pouring hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money into a company called Solyndra. And that when that went belly up and the CEOs got to fill their pockets and walk away while the American taxpayer had to foot the bill, I would have thought, that might wake some people up that this whole thing is a fraud and a scam. That didn't work. When you see Germany supposedly going to completely revolutionize and redo their entire energy grid in the green way. So we're going to have lots of wind, we're going to have lots of solar. And very quickly, everybody's energy bills went through the roof. They started worrying about having enough energy capacity in order to power up one of the most important economic engines of Europe. That didn't really seem to faze anybody. And I think it was just a couple of months ago that the leaders of industry in Germany said, we have to close these factories down and move elsewhere because we know we're not going to have enough power to actually run our factories if this stupid green energy madness continues. That apparently hasn't woken anybody up. You see, I know Sterling Burnett is watching the show here in the chat. He lives in Texas. We had the Texas power disaster that happened in February, I think 2 Februaries ago. And that didn't really wake anybody up. It's fine. We can continue moving forward like this. You can show pictures of children in the Congo digging up cobalt and other rare earth minerals in absolutely filthy and dangerous and horrible conditions. And you can show those pictures. You can there was a whole documentary about that. There was a book written about that. Nobody seems to care. And so I'm probably the most cynical person on this podcast. I think after this parade of proof that green energy not only can't work, it's created in immoral ways. And if this hasn't woken people up, I can't imagine anything can wake people up. Maybe it will take them not having power at all in their homes for weeks on end, because the stability of the entire national grid has been so compromised that we can't even keep this country running anymore. If it comes to that, it's way too late. As it is right now, it's already way too late. But I keep waiting for that eureka moment when people realize this is all a scam and cannot work. It cannot work. As Linnea said, there isn't enough copper in the world just to give everybody in the United Kingdom an electric car, let alone everybody in the world. And then you come to realize, you know what? They know that. And that's the point. They don't want us to have energy independence. They don't want us to have personal transportation. They don't want us to have affordable energy prices. They don't want us to be able to heat our homes and to live our lives. And even the Pope says we have to change the way we live our lives, because the people who want to control us think that if you have too much freedom, and energy is the engine of freedom, that's a problem. So they're doing all they can to stop freedom at its source, which is energy.
Yeah. Linnea, this is the question of the podcast. It's just like, what is it going to take? And last week on Climate Change Roundtable, again, Fridays at noon Central Time, you can join the show at Heartland's YouTube channel. Last week you had Steve Gorham on talking about his new book, which is called Green Breakdown, I believe. And in it, at one part of the episode, he talked about how he thinks that people will finally understand this at some point. He's like, maybe it'll be 10 years from now, maybe it'll be 20 years from now. What went through your head when he said that? Were you saying like, oh yeah, I think that will happen on that timetable, maybe shorter, maybe longer, or no, that's never going to happen? What do you think?
I think, unfortunately, because we rather like having a dramatic reveal of the truth or whatever, and where everyone all of a sudden wakes up. But I really don't think that that's normally how things work. I think it's normally a really slow slog. And I think you guys are partially right when you say that it's going to take people feeling personal pain in their own lives in order to realize that these ideas are probably not so good. Some of the people that I've talked to in the past who used to be on board with the green stuff all of a sudden became skeptical, not because they heard it in the news or something that perked up their ears, because most people aren't paying that much attention, to be honest. No one's as into this topic as we are. I mean, it really is kind of a niche political position to have, even on the right. So no one knows all of the information, which is why it's such a good thing that Heartland goes out and tries to disseminate some of these facts. But they're not going to report that kind of stuff on CNN. What people do find out, and in my experience is what happens, is they get a wind development project or something that starts going up, or their electricity bills start going up, and then all of a sudden they say, well, hang on a second, I'm seeing dead birds all over the place, or I'm getting headaches because of the flicker, or whatever it happens to be. There's something really weird going on here, and we're not getting the full story. And so they'll start investigating. They'll go to like John Droz's website about stopping wind development, or some of the other programs that are out there to help people figure out how to fight them in their neighborhood. And they'll find that there are other people out there who have been talking about how these projects are not as beneficial as they are purported to be. And then they'll start kind of snowballing and learning all the rest of the stuff. But usually it takes something in their personal life that brings them to this perspective. And if they never get, badly hit by it, or, the opposite can happen, they can start going worse to the other side. If they get hit by a hurricane or something, and then all they're seeing on TV is that this is because of climate change. Well, that's going to influence the way that people think. So I'll beat the drum on this forever. The media is our main hurdle on this issue. I really think so. I think that if you were to turn, or at least get some skepticism in the mainstream media, the kind of stuff that people don't have to go out of their way to find, that would be a major turning point for us.
Yeah,
Donnie, I know that you mentioned earlier that you don't want to talk about the problem of climate change, but all these solutions are predicated on climate change being an existential crisis. So if we were to, to poke holes in that narrative as we, do every day here, I think that would also help people understand that, wait a second, these programs and these, green energy, subsidies are actually not even necessary in the first place. So I think that is like a core part of this whole, argument.
I know, but I just wonder, like, even if we were to allow them, the that problem or something like that, and just have their solutions align with reality, like anything, like if they just went full
Yeah.
bore into nuclear or something like that, like something that would actually be like a feasible solution to the quote unquote problem, then like I can sleep at night. But just this like rigid adherence to some fantasy, it blows my mind, and that's what is causing me to have wanting to dedicate.
Well, I
this
think you got to
episode.
follow the money, and like you said earlier, in order for these wind turbine fields and the solar panel arrays to be connected to the grid, it's going to be a whole bunch of new transmission lines, and that costs lots of money, and that's lots of money for these energy companies that they want, and a lot of it comes from the federal and state government. So it really, I think it just boils down to follow the money.
Yeah, well, okay.
Before you move on to the next one, I mean, the bottom line is that we are fighting against at least two generations of people who have been completely indoctrinated into a climate cult. They cannot think about these things. You can present them all the facts you want, and it will not penetrate because they are not dealing in a logical world. They're dealing in a fantasy world, and they're dealing, and you're dealing with people who are so fanatical that they are religious in their adherence to this. Now those are the zealots, but even just so ordinary people are just they've been in their entire life awash in this stuff. They've been 50 feet deep under an ocean of propaganda. And so it's very hard. We tried. I think we do a really good job, but it's going to take a lot of time. As somebody, one of our viewers here on the podcast had noted, that the madness of crowds, like you can get a mob really worked up and brainwashed, and that happens relatively quickly and on a broad scale. But you only cure them of this one by one by one, and it takes more time, and that's what we're working on right
Jim
now.
brings up a really good point, because when I was in middle school, Al Gore's movie came out, and we were forced to watch it, and then I think we had to do like a report on like how we could do that. And I remember went home later that day, and I think I was talking to my dad about climate change, and he was like, actually, that's not really true. And then he kind of opened my eyes. But then I just think all these students, millions and millions of students for the past couple of decades, have been brainwashed into this indoctrination factory. And I saw it when I was teaching at a high school in South Carolina. The Earth Science department was all about climate change. That was all they talked about, and that's all they did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and that was actually my little waking up moment, was when I was in middle school. We watched Inconvenient Truth. We watched some other thing, talked about Silent Spring, did all that stuff. I had two teachers for all of my classes in 8th grade, and they were obsessed. Every single class that I took, they tied to climate change. Mm-hmm. We sold reusable bags, all that stuff. But I was a little nerd, and I read those zoo books religiously. And one day my teacher said that polar bears are dying when the ice is melting because they're not good swimmers. And that just flicked a switch in my brain. I was like, wait a second. Yes, they are. They're the best swimmers. And I didn't believe a thing she told me after that. Right. And it just, so
your expert card just got revoked.
Yeah. It's stuff like that gets to people. But I will say, I don't think that people losing power is going to be enough. Because so far, when people lose power, they blame it on climate change. So I think that it needs to be worse than that, unfortunately.
My heart really goes out to the people that are true believers in the climate crisis, but also realize that this whole idea, like the solutions that are being proposed by everyone on that side, aren't solutions. They're not real. It's like, I don't know where Michael Schellenberger currently stands on the idea of a climate crisis, but I know that's how he kind of got into this side of the debate, is realizing that the solutions weren't real solutions. Or Chris, you already mentioned Michael Moore with that Planet of the Humans documentary, or the guy that kind of directed it or narrated it, I forget, Jeff Gibbs. They both those two for sure. True believers realize that wind and solar are a corporate scam. And it's just like, basically, it's like you're telling me that, a comet is coming and you don't have an actual practical solution like sending Bruce Willis up there to blow it up or anything like that. Your solution is magic? I'm supposed to sleep at night knowing that magic is the solution? Like, my heart really goes out to those true believers. But I want to get back to this main point, but I want to bring up another facet of this whole kind of climate narrative and the solutions around it, and that's in regards to transportation. So transitioning the American fleet of cars to EVs, electric vehicles. So again, this is a topic that we've discussed on multiple occasions on this podcast. We've talked about the limited range of electric vehicles, how expensive they are, how government subsidies are basically only benefiting upper class people when it comes to buying these cars. We've talked about how expensive it is replacing the batteries and the increased likelihood of them catching on fire. We've talked about how they are not equipped to withstand the cold weather. And like wind and solar, they require massive amounts of rare earth materials, which we are increasingly reliant on China for. And again, these issues that we've covered before on this podcast is enough for me not to want to get one. But again, we have a bunch more stories to heap onto this pile. So the first one that I want to discuss is out of Kansas. I saw one commenter, I think maybe it was Bob, mentioned this in the comments just a few minutes ago. But it's a story out of Kansas where a Japanese technology company has set up a large electric vehicle battery plant. And apparently this plant uses so much energy to produce electric vehicle batteries that the state's energy company is going to keep a coal plant, which was slated to close, open. So that's right. In order to build more batteries for our nice, clean electric vehicles, we're going to have to continue to burn a whole lot more coal. And not only that, but the Japanese firm also stands to garner billions of dollars in federal subsidies. So, Jim, I mean, this would be comical if it weren't so indicative of how ridiculous the system we've built around this so-called green industry. What do you think about this particular story?
Yeah, well, that story. I think I saw a reference to the Cowboy State Daily, which of course is Wyoming, which of course Linnea went to the University of Wyoming, so she has a connection there, and seems to be a lot of common sense and smart people that come in and out of Wyoming, which should probably be recruiting from there to handle all of our sensitive government activities.
Yeah, I like the journalist, one of the journalists who work at this paper. He's really cool.
Yeah,
but not just because he quotes me all the time.
He does quote you all the time because he's very.
I feel bad for throwing shade at Wyoming last. I literally just picked the state to make fun of last week, and now I apologize, Wyoming.
Well, it's okay because Liz Cheney was,
Yeah, it's true. Liz Cheney is a representative there, so you can make fun of him for that.
Take back my apology. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, no, it's just. I mean, I've said it several times. It's like one of the ways I try to communicate this to people who believe in green energy and that green energy is the future. I say that green energy can't generate enough energy to create itself. In other words, you would need, somebody should calculate how many wind turbines you would need and where they would have to be placed and how many transmission lines would have to be brought in to feed a factory that makes nothing but wind turbines. In other words, it's not, the energy is so unreliable and not dense enough that green energy literally can't generate enough energy to make more green energy. Fossil fuels can not only, you can not only use the power from a coal plant to build other coal plants easily. You can just keep multiplying them, not to mention a nuclear plant's ability to create other nuclear plants if you were just to use that source of energy. I think that's one way I've tried to explain to people that and this story about they're needing to build a brand new coal plant in Kansas to in order to power a factory that will make electric batteries. I mean, or batteries for electric vehicles. I mean, it's awesome. That is like the example of what I've been trying to tell people for so long, and it made me laugh so much.
Yeah, no, it's absurd. And there's one other story, and then I'll get a comment from Linnea and Chris that I want to bring up. And this is this I think might be even a better story of just the absurdity of all of this stuff. So in 2023, the Biden administration poured $1.7 billion into a federal transit administration's grant program to encourage low and no emission vehicles as a part of Biden's infrastructure plan. So Jackson, Wyoming being brought up again, received nearly $1 million under this grant to purchase a fleet of electric city buses. They bought them from a firm called Proterra, one of the nation's largest electric bus manufacturers. Well, Proterra went under due to, quote, various market and macroeconomic headwinds. And the 8 buses that Jackson, Wyoming bought, well, they're in need of repair, and the only company apparently capable of servicing these vehicles is Proterra, which I said went out of business. So the buses are just basically sitting in some city garage somewhere, just rotting away. And you just have to, like, seriously think about, like, the whole scope of this story to understand its level of absurdity. So the state and federal governments take tax money from you, give it to a firm like Proterra in forms of grants and subsidies and tax breaks to make electric vehicle, EV buses or whatever. Then the federal government takes more tax money and gives it to local governments so that they can buy the products from companies like Proterra, right? So the money is extracted from the economy, run through a massive complex bureaucracy so that there is an artificial customer and an artificial supplier. The situation is so far from a free market, it's unbelievable. And then everything is completely wasted because the company can't even stay in business. So this has got to be one of the most extreme examples of government waste, inefficiency, cronyism, or anything like that you can come up with. And the justification for all of those levels of absurdity is this idea of, well, we're going to fight back against climate change by doing this. It is so unbelievable to me that this is just like applauded, by everyone on the left, because now Jackson, Wyoming is fighting against climate change. It's unbelievable to me. So, Chris, I'm going to let you take a kind of a swing at this whole topic of electric vehicles and maybe that story specifically.
I think you hit the nail on the head that this is cronyism at its finest. The federal government puts out subsidies for products that people don't want to buy. People don't want to buy those products because they are not ready for prime time yet. And in a place like Wyoming, I'm not talking about the buses, I'm talking about EV cars here. There aren't enough charging stations. In these very rural counties in like the heartland of America, there just aren't enough charging stations for people to, buy these cars and charge them yet. And people just don't want them. So this is just, like Jim said with Solyndra, the examples are, numerous, where the federal government says, we want this outcome. Therefore, we take money from you, taxpayers, to try to make that outcome happen. And even with that, happening, the outcome still doesn't happen because the people just don't want it. So, Donnie, like you said, it would be so much better for our overall economy, for people's wallets, just for everything, if the federal government and state governments, for that matter, just said, you know what, we're just going to allow you to choose what kind of car you want to drive. And I would take that to the next level and say, we also are going to allow you to choose what kind of light bulb you want to put in your house and just everything. If they would just let us make decisions, because Donnie, you and I talk a lot about this. People in the government, bureaucrats, or people on a 5-year plan and stuff, they never have enough knowledge in order for them to make these grand decisions that are going to impact people in vastly different circumstances. So someone in New York City, yeah, they might like an EV because they don't maybe drive very much, or maybe they have charging stations at their disposal, but it's not going to work. In a country that is as large as the United States and as different as the United States, one-size solutions never work. We've seen that for the course of over the past century in totalitarian dictatorships. It never works. However, the federal government just keeps wanting to go back to that well, and it's really it's for money and power.
Yeah, and Jim, I just kind of want to circle back to the main question of the podcast, which is what's it going to take? Like, again, you take one of these true believers. Climate change is going to destroy us all. And okay, well, what's the solution? Oh, well, we're going to take tax money. We're going to make up this company that's going to sell electric buses. And then we're going to pay people to buy those buses. And then they're all just going to rot away in a garage because that company can't possibly actually stay financially feasible. Like, it's just ridiculous. That person would just be like, is this a joke? Or like, are you kidding me? Like, I feel like that would have to wake them up. But it's not. What's it going to take, Jim? Seriously.
Well, I think it's going to take even more electric vehicles just spontaneously combusting in people's homes. I mean, we've already seen, Andy could probably find in 10 seconds, video of buses that electric buses that catch on fire. And I know Linnea has talked about this on a few occasions on the Climate Change Roundtable show, that an electric vehicle fire, when that battery catches fire, is extremely hard to put out. and it's very, very dangerous. There you go. Hey, there's video on there. The start of an electric bus vehicle fire. That is horrifying. That is terrible. If you're inside that bus when that happens, you are dead right now. It's over. You're finished. You are a dead person. And
it's like a thermite fountain.
Where's Jamal Bowman when you need him, huh?
That is crazy. And so, I'm glad the incident caused no injuries, it says. Yeah, but look at everybody, get the hell out of the way.
Oh my God.
Look, and more things catch fire.
Carbon footprint of that. Jeez.
I know, right? What's the carbon footprint of that? Look, oh my God, look at all that black smoke going up in the air. That's terrible. That's actual pollution, guys. Carbon dioxide is not pollution. That is actually pollution. But, when I see this stuff, I think if they weren't mandating that we get into electric vehicles, these things would be banned. There is no way that they would allow people to have vehicles that will spontaneously combust and you didn't do anything wrong and kill you and your whole family in one of the hottest fires that can most spontaneously erupt. It would be banned. They would not allow these things on the market. They are so dangerous. And in fact, I saw a story the other day about how people who are buying electric vehicles are finding out that the insurance rates on those things are through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Right. That's why, because they could just catch fire spontaneously like that. If the environmental left was actually serious about not controlling our lives and making our lives worse, but actually doing ecological good to the planet, we would be having discussions about encouraging people to get into hybrid vehicles, because that reduces your carbon footprint quite a lot when you use battery power instead of using your internal combustion engine all the time. But they don't want to do that. No, that's old technology. That doesn't work. It would actually do a lot. If your goal is to reduce emissions, that would go a long way to doing it, because it's obviously a hybrid solution. If you were serious about reducing carbon dioxide emissions and the generation of electricity in this country, you'd be saying, let's go nuclear all across the country and do that first, and then bring all of these coal and gas plants back. They don't want to do that either. So it makes you think their agenda is not actually saving the environment, but making your life crap. And reducing the standard of living and bringing the United States and the whole West to heel to a globalist Marxist agenda in which we're all poorer and thus easier to control. I'm sorry that that's my conclusion. Talk me out of it. I can't think of another way to get there, or another reason why all reasonable solutions are not being pursued, and only solutions that are super expensive, a complete fraud, have cars catching on fire spontaneously everywhere. Convince me that I'm wrong. Because that's all I see is what the reality is out there.
Well, what's funny about this case in particular, about the electric vehicles, is that, like, individually, people are rejecting this, right? I mean, like, electric vehicle. I think there was like a Bill Maher clip that I'd seen recently where he was talking about like not only are electric cars like not selling more than normal cars, it's like, or no, what did he say? He said like the most popular car in America was an electric car. It wasn't even a car, it was a truck. It's like Americans are so far from like accepting this as like a real alternative to their internal combustion engine. Like, we were so far from that reality. And Jim, you shared another story with me on Slack a couple of days ago about how General Motors only sold 18 electric vehicles in the entire third quarter of this past year. 18, and you had to reassure me.
18 of a specific model of truck. 18 trucks.
Right. Okay, 18 of these trucks. Right. And you're like, and I didn't leave a zero off or a couple of zeros off. No, it was just 18, right? So it's like, yeah, I mean, people are rejecting this on an individual basis, yet they're still electing people that are passing policies that enforce this type of stuff on the population at large. So it's like, at an individual basis, I think people are awake to this not really being a solution. And the people that are buying electric vehicles are just like, it's like a novelty thing to virtue signal or whatever for the most part. Generally, people aren't doing it to save the planet. But they're still doing this end around thing where they're voting for the politicians that are enacting these policies that force this on us, or that throw billions of dollars in subsidies to the companies that are involved in this. So like they still have to wake up from that part.
Yeah, but that's because people vote on their emotions, not on their, not on logic and reason and ration. And unfortunately, that's been happening a lot more since who came to the presidency in 2016.
Yeah. So, Linnea, I'm just going to throw the grand question of this episode to you one more time before we close out the show. But it's just, what is it going to take? Seriously, what is it going to take? We could just pump out article after article and video after video and study after study that just proves these points. But what's it going to take? Like, seriously, what's it going to take to wake people up? The whole weight of this world is on you right now in this.
Okay,
answer,
cool.
So.
Well,
pressure.
the whole weight of the world is on me, and I think that step one is to just obliterate the mainstream media. I really think that if the mainstream, or at least take over, take them from the inside or something, and it's going to take a while. But I really think that if on people's television all day long when they're at airports, because apparently that's the only people who are watching CNN. If you're at the airport, if you're at the bus stop, whatever, if you're somewhere, anywhere that you are, and there's some kind of mainstream news, the Weather Channel, if you're playing the Weather Channel, and the Weather Channel is reciting a bunch of this hurricane was made 14% more powerful by climate change, according to this all attribution study. If you're getting that all day and you're not someone who is interested in this stuff, then you're just going to believe it. And I don't think that you can be blamed necessarily, because not everyone is an expert on everything. Most of us have a few issues that we just kind of take the experts, so to speak, for granted, and we just believe them, which we compartmentalize. And which I think is a mistake, but I think it's something that everyone does to one extent or the other. But if we can take over some of those institutions, I think it's going to be really important. But more than that, I think that pain, unfortunately, is going to be one of the main wake-up calls. When people are seeing, their friend who owned a farm for years get his farm taken from him by the government or whatever, for green-related stuff, or if they are trying to force more people to eat those abominations, we're starting to get people who are usually kind of the crystal tarot card reader types to turn on the green people because of some of this mass-produced fake meat stuff, because they realize that it's not good for you, and that's their niche. So they're really hyped up about the WEF pushing fake meat. So I think it's going to be, individuals are going to slowly over time get sick of this stuff. They already rank at the lowest among all of the issues that they face consistently worldwide. If you give someone a poll and you poll every person in the world and you ask them to rank economy, grocery store food prices, social issues, all of that stuff, they are all going to rank higher than climate change every single time. It's only when you ask someone, is climate change really important? That's when they'll say, yeah, definitely, because they hear it 600 times a day.
Right. Linnea, I have just a slightly different take on that. I think it boils down to the plain pain, pleasure principle. And humans tend to change their behaviors when the pain is more than the pleasure. And I'm not talking about them seeking pleasure from driving EVs or from, buying solar panels for their homes. But right now, I think that the pleasure exists in that they are not ostracized if they fall in line with that. And until there's a societal and a cultural shift in which most people say, wait a second, that's garbage. What are you talking about? Then they're going to say, oh yeah, and it would actually it would behoove them to say, yeah, you're right, that is garbage, and I'm not going to succumb to that kind of garbage thinking. But right now, it's just that like you said, the media, the schools, Hollywood, all these very significant cultural institutions have such sway over people that a lot of my friends, it's they just buy the end of the narrative, because I think that they're afraid to to be brave enough to actually question or counter it. So once you get a majority of the population saying, wait a second, and Donnie, this goes back to our original thing of whether people actually believe climate change necessitates this, giant, shift in their lives. Once the 50% or 50.1% of the people say, wait a second, no, it doesn't, then I think we're going to see a change. However, we have not reached that point yet. And I hate to be pessimistic, but when you look at children in particular, they are very, very, ardent that climate change is an existential crisis, and they don't even want to have children, and blah, 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 blah. So we definitely need to reach those young minds and actually, ingrain them with the truth. In fact,
yeah, it's. I think it's going to increasingly become this thing for like the future generations, that like all of your problems that you're experiencing in your life are going to be attributable to climate change, and in reality, it's like the policies that are being like pushed and using just climate change as a justification that's really the problem of all, the source of all of these people's problems. So maybe that's the strategy to kind of get through to that next generation. No, it's not climate change. It's not the idea that a stronger hurricane is causing you to not be able to find a job. It's all of these solutions that are being thrown around using climate change as a justification.
So-called solutions to non-existent problems.
Jim, any final words on any of these issues that we've talked about?
No, I just would encourage all of our regular viewers on the YouTube channel to remember to bring a friend next time. Maybe we'll have some sort of contest. You can get a free gift, some free Heartland swag or something if
Nice.
maybe we'll make a contest into that. But thanks everyone for being here and for another great show.
Yeah, and one other last thing, Sterling in the chat made a reference to Atlas Shrugged, which just by some weird coincidence, I have just started revisiting just like several days ago. That's sitting right there. I'm on chapter like 4 or 5 of that.
Donnie, you're on page 1. Right, just kidding.
And it is mind blowing to me how relevant that book is to what's going on today. Minus the climate change as like the justification for all of the terrible policies that are being pursued by all of the kind of antagonistic characters in that is all just kind of your classic collectivist thinking and everything, but it's still so relevant to what's going on today. There was sections during the first like 50 pages of the book that was just like, they must be talking about ESG here. Like, this is the same exact ESG rhetoric that I'm hearing today, but she's writing about it in a book that was published in 1956 or something like that, 1957.
These are timeless issues that span generations. It's the micromanagers versus the freedom lovers.
Right. And to close off the show, we just got a super chat from one of our most loyal listeners here, Christine, saying, thanks for raising these topics. Awesome show. Thank you, Christine, for supporting the show like that. It is greatly appreciated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. Please subscribe, rate a review for us on iTunes if you're an audio-only listener. And if you're an audio-only listener listening to the show on a Friday or later, you can join us a day earlier where we are live streaming this on YouTube and Twitter and Rumble and Facebook. And you can join the conversation by throwing your comments and questions in the chat there. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll adjust your questions on the fly. Also, you can follow us on Twitter if you would like at In the Tank Pod, or you can send us your comments, suggestions, and questions to the show by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
StoppingSocialism.com, heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Linnea, for people to follow your work, where can they go?
Well, check us out on Friday for the live stream Climate Change Roundtable. That's at 1 o'clock Eastern, so noon Central. And also at climaterealism.com, Sterling Burnett and I wrote a op-ed on the renewable energy subsidies thing, and I highly recommend everyone go read that article because we put a lot of work into it, and it really makes it very clear that renewables are not being outpaced by fossil fuels when it comes to getting subsidies. So this arms you with some facts and figures that you can spam at people and win internet arguments with, which everyone loves. So.
Intellectual ammunition, you might call it. That's right. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.